This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, thank you, Carol. Okay, we got a couple minutes yet before we get started. Does anybody have any questions just pertaining to anything that or projects that you're working on? Good morning.
Morning.
How are you today?
Fine. I didn't get a handout
You
or
didn't?
an email. No, I didn't.
I had you on the list as,
And I checked my junk mail and it wasn't there either.
okay, it's Anderson BRE at iCloud.
Correct.
Well, it didn't tell me it didn't send it. I'll try to send it again real quick.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I sent it, Brenda. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Did it come in, Brenda?
No, it didn't. And I know you've sent me things many a times.
It's ANDERSONBRE at iCloud.com.
Correct.
That's what I use. And it says it's sent.
Interesting one.
Annoying, very annoying. Good morning, Meg. Nice to have you here.
Thanks.
How are you?
Pretty good. Been busy.
You have, huh?
Yeah.
I miss seeing you in class.
Oh, well, thank you. Sometimes I don't get the instructions. This time I
Well,
did.
Did you get it this time?
Yes, I did.
Well, I've been sending them out instead of Carol because she has a computer issue.
Yeah. Well, the last, my sister switched her birthday party, so we had to do sister stuff. I know.
Sometimes that happens.
I know. Huh?
Well, did everybody but Brenda get the handout for today? If you didn't, please tell me. Okay, so Brenda, I'm sorry. hopefully that you can understand what's going on, and what we're going to cover today, the section that we're on is called Specialty Embroidery Techniques, Tips and Hints. And we're going to cover a lot of the accessories that are not included when you bought your machine, except, you know, if you bought it with some of the special promotion deals. So the first one we're going to talk about is our ribbon embroidery attachment. And my little friend here is just a sample of the ribbon embroidery. I haven't done anything with the tails yet. I want to pull them to the back to neaten them up rather than just cutting them off, because I just don't like those frayed ends. And you can see here the width of the ribbon, but when it's stitched down, it gets stitched right in the middle, so that stitching causes the ribbon to curl up and to sit up like this. So you really, it's no longer flat. It has some dimension to it, if you haven't had an opportunity to use the ribbon embroidery attachment. And all the stitching for it with the ribbon is just straight stitching, which you can see here on the back, that all of this straight stitching is what holds the ribbon down. There's no zigzag or embroidery stitches or anything. It's just straight stitching. And the embroidery attachment is guiding the ribbon as it is put down. And maybe that might be a little easier to see the straight stitching on this example that was done on sheer fabric with sheer ribbon. You can see that it's very easily that it is just straight stitching. Okay. Now, our handout goes into a lot of information about the ribbon embroidery attachment. The first thing that it talks about is unboxing. So here it comes in this nice sturdy box, and it is suggested that when you're not using it, that you keep it in this box to keep it safe, because the box is well padded and well thought out. The attachment has its little nest in the box, which you can't really see, but it does. It's made cut out exactly so that the attachment fits in it. And also the bracket that you need to attach the embroidery unit to the machine is included in the box. So when you're not using it, it's a good idea to keep it in this nice sturdy box. All right. There are designs built into the machine for our ribbon attachment. And there's a lot of ways to get, as you know, to get to different designs in the machine. If you go to the embroidery on the home screen on your Joy of Sewing screen, if you go to the embroidery section and you select surfaced embroidery, you have an option to select ribbon attachment, and it will bring you up the designs that are built into the machine that use the ribbon attachment. There's not a whole lot of them built into the machine, but there are several of them. Excuse me. You can also go to the Sewnet library, and search on ribbon attachment designs, and there are a lot of them on my Sewnet. When you select that function from the Joy of Sewing screen, it will open a tutorial, and it will go through the typical things for the tutorials on our machine. It tells you a list of materials. It tells you how to prepare for it. And then it has some movies about all the stuff that in your handout. It's telling you step by step how to set up your attachment, how to attach it to the machine, and how to use it. When you select a design to be used on your machine, let me go back one step here. On page 1 in number 4, under designs, it says that the designs will be marked with a ribbon embroidery attachment icon, and it's talking about in your sampler book for embroideries. It does show you the symbol for the ribbon embroidery attachment. It also shows you how much ribbon that particular design is going to use. All right. There's another way to find out how much ribbon is going to be used. And we'll get to that in a minute. First, I just want to show you a couple things that they didn't mention in this handout. If I select my little flower design here and I load it, it tells me that that's a ribbon embroidery design. It says, ribbon embroidery design is loaded. Make sure to place all ribbon designs inside the ribbon frame. Also make sure that the selected hoop is supported for ribbon embroidery before entering stitch out. Now, what it means by make sure that it's supported is that when you go down to your hoop selection, this is a very small design. It's 64.6 by 65 millimeters, but it has put it in the 240 by 150 hoop. And you can see on the screen that there's an extra line on the inside of the hoop. Well, for this 240 by 150 hoop, that is the largest design that you can put in there that for the ribbon embroidery attachment. Because of the size of the ribbon embroidery attachment, it needs extra room so it doesn't bump into the hoop as it's working. So if I think I really don't want to use that great big hoop for that little design, and I touch my hoop selection, you'll notice that the smallest hoop that's not grayed out is 200 by 200. And the reason it's not selected for this particular design is that is not a that's an accessory hoop, and it just decided that was the 240 by 150 was a better fit than the 200 by 200. Notice that you could also use the metal hoop in it, but if this were a normal embroidery design, you would be putting it in your 100 by 100 or your 120 by 120 hoop. But if you're using an ribbon embroidery design, that will not work. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Now, supposing this is an embroidery design that's built in, and the length of the ribbon is shown in my sampler book, but if I don't have my sampler book handy and I want to find out how much ribbon I'm going to need to make this design, what's loose? If I load my design and I'm in embroidery edit and I touch my palette over here for the thread color edit, it shows me the various colors. Morning, Mary, glad you're here.
Morning, so am I.
Okay, if you touch while your design is selected and you have thread color edit open, if you touch your question mark and then touch the color for your ribbon, it will tell you the amount of ribbon you need for that particular design. So that's another way to find out. And if the design you've chosen isn't in your sampler book, that's a way to find out how much ribbon you're going to need. And fortunately, the one that you bring up on the screen, or the one in the book, tells you in yards as well as metric. The one on the screen only tells you in metric. But if you put a little decimal point here between it says 562 millimeters. So that's 56 centimeters or 5 meters, and a meter is 39 inches. So that's that's a yard, a little bit plus. So if you had 6 yards of ribbon, that would be great for this design. Any questions on that? When we first got the ribbon attachment, there was always a question of, well, how am I going to know how much ribbon I need? And it's always like most everything else, it's better to have a little more than to run short. Okay. So on page 2, it talks about loading the ribbon into your attachment. So your attachment, this is the little guy. It has a plug-in that goes into the back of the machine where the buttonhole foot normally plugs into. And there's this black clip on one side of it. To release the ribbon bobbin, we'll call it, you push this clip up and then you can lift this white ring out of the attachment. On the attachment, or on this ring, there's a little black door, a clip, and its purpose is to hold the end of the ribbon as you wind it. Now, this is one-sided ribbon, so it's recommended that you wind a one-sided ribbon with the good side or the pretty side, whatever you want to call it, out. If you have a double-faced ribbon, then it doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that your ribbon is laying nice and flat. It doesn't have to fit up against one side. It's okay if it kind of goes back and forth as you're winding it. Once you have wound it, then you're ready to put it back into the attachment. There's a slot on the outer ring of the attachment close to that black clip, which my ribbon's not going to cooperate today. It's a little stiff. Okay. I'm going to set the ring back down into the attachment, and I'm going to take the end of the ribbon and pull it into that slot, and then I'm going to clip the attachment or clip the ring in place with this black clip. Then the ribbon needs to be threaded into the bottom of the attachment. There's a hole here. It goes into the center and back down into this next slot. And then there is a black wheel, let's see, right here on the bottom. And you want to turn it. I don't know if you can see that when I turn it, that those two little gray pieces move further apart and closer together. You're going to thread the ribbon into the slot so it goes between those gray pieces. Maybe. Why are you being, there we go. And it's going to come out, and then you're going to snug, you turn that wheel and snug those gray pieces up against the ribbon to hold it in the center, because the needle is going, see that little notch right there? The needle is going to be right there and centered. If your ribbon isn't secured and it slides over to the side, the ribbon or the needle might not catch it as it's stitching. So you want to snug this up, and I like to just let it just barely buckle the ribbon. And now you're ready to put it on the machine. In order to get it on the machine, we're going to mount this bracket on the presser bar or and secure it with the regular ankle screw. So this hole here has a flat side in it. Let's see, has a let's see, can I turn it so you can see? Yeah, there's a flat side, and that goes against the flat side on the presser bar here. Okay, so I'm going to just slide that up as far as it'll go and put my screw in there to hold it nice and tight. Make sure your screw is really snug, so that, because an attachment weighs a little bit and you don't want it to come off. When you get ready to, you've got your bracket on your machine, you've got your presser bar. You do not want it in the highest position. You want it in the next to highest position. So make sure, using your buttons on the machine, that you test it and make sure that it's in the lower of the two positions. Then to put your attachment on, there are 3 rings on the attachment with some red marks on them. So we want to line up red marks for all 3 of those rings until they look like this. And then from the back of the machine, you're going to put the attachment on with the needle going right over the top of those 3 marks that you've lined up. Then in here, there's a slot in the attachment. See that slot right there? That's going to go over the 2 little bumps that are on that bracket. So you're just going to slide it right on, and it's going to click into place. And when your needle should be positioned right over the hole in the center. If we were actually going to embroider, it's important to have your needle threaded, to have a full bobbin in your machine, and to have your hoop in position before you put the attachment on. Then when you plug the plug into the back of the machine, you're going to get a message on the screen of your machine, and it says embroidery attachment needs to calibrate. Before you embroider, make sure to have the correct pivot height for your ribbon width. Go to temporary embroidery settings to set recommended pivot heights. When it's talking about the pivot height, it's talking about the distance that the bottom of the attachment is away from your hoop, your hooped object that you're going to embroider on. So when you touch the check mark, your ribbon attachment is going to calibrate, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's it. That's all it does. It makes that little funny sound and makes sure it's in the right position. Then we need to go to our settings and temporary embroidery settings, and we now have a section called ribbon embroidery attachment pivot height. That section will not appear in your settings until you have your embroidery attachment, ribbon attachment plugged into your machine. Otherwise, you can't see this. So now it says on it, the wider the ribbon, the higher the recommended pivot height. So if your ribbon is 3 to 4 millimeters high, your pivot height should be somewhere between 1 and 4. If your ribbon is 5 to 7 millimeters, it should be between 4 and 7. And if your ribbon is wide, 8 to 12 millimeters, then your pivot height should be between 7 or 9. So if I were actually going to embroider with this, and I'll watch the attachment as I change the numbers, it's actually moving up or down as I change the pivot height. So that's, if you're familiar with the ruler foot, you can set the height on it, like kind of the same fashion that you can set the height on the ribbon attachment. Once you've gotten that set up, then you should be ready to actually embroidery. You want about 1.5 inches of ribbon tail when you start to embroider, and what I've got here is a little extra much, so I can wind it back just by turning the white ring in the attachment, so I don't have a lot of wasted ribbon. And then once you start embroidering, the attachment will move and keep the ribbon lined up with the direction that the stitches are going. When it's finished, then to take it off, this black button here is your release button. You want to unplug it from the back of the machine. Then you again want to line up you push your button, slide it back, tip it, and line up your red marks just like you did when you started. It's not gonna, okay. And then you can slide it right off of the machine. I know that some of you have used the ribbon embroidery attachment, and that was a lot of information that you know, but for those of you who haven't, are kind of reluctant to do that, maybe it was helpful. Any questions? from that?
I appreciate seeing it again.
Okay, you're welcome. All right.
Oh, let me ask you a question, Judy. Do you know of a way, can you search somehow for the, not on the library, but on your machine for the designs that use ribbon? Or do you just have to page through the book and the signature ones and look for ribbons?
No, if you, okay, if we go back to our joy of sewing, our home screen, whatever you want to call it, and under embroidery, if we select
Okay,
surfaced embroidery and then say ribbon attachment,
I,
it will pick out the designs for us.
yeah, I keep forgetting about that feature. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. That's, that's a good point to bring up.
So Judy, is there a way to convert an embroidery or part of it into ribbon?
In the software, in the MySewNet software, not on the machine.
Do you need to buy the embroidery pattern in order to do it, or can you do it just as a temporary thing?
If you have a subscription to the MySewNet software, then you automatically have access to all the designs in the library.
Yeah, but I was trying to figure out.
Otherwise, pardon?
I have that and I looked, but I could not figure out how to convert part of a pattern to ribbon. But that's another topic.
Okay, but I'll keep that in mind, okay?
Thanks.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, that covered just a point here on the bottom of page 3. Number 6 says thread your tails through a tapestry needle and pull to the back. Weave ribbon through stitches on backside to secure. Well, you can secure them however you want. If you're using a very wide ribbon, it'd be hard to weave them into the stitches on the back. So I suggest that you maybe some fabric glue or something is a good option to secure your ends. If you watch the videos on the machine about the ribbon embroidery, they show cutting the tails very close to the stitching rather than pulling them to the back. Personally, I prefer pulling them to the back because I don't, especially if it were on a garment, I wouldn't want the possibility that the end of the ribbon would fray. So I like to pull them to the back if at all possible. And you just need to put them in a good size needle and then take that needle and kind of wiggle it so it makes a good size hole, and then which will close up once you've pulled the ribbon through. Okay. All right. Our next topic on page 4 is cutwork. And cutwork is a traditional heirloom kind of technique where there are actually holes cut into the fabrics. And then the holes are stitched around with thread to cover the raw edges, and sometimes even just what they call Richelieu bars are stitched to join a space that has been cut into the fabric. This is an example of, and it's not showing up real well, of some cut work and there is nothing behind the holes in the fabric, but it's held together by the stitching. Sometimes cut work can be done and then have a sheer fabric put underneath it to cover up the spaces in the cut work. These happen, this one also has some sheer fabric underneath the main fabric to cover up the holes made by the cut work. And the cut work is done using special needles. These are the Cutwork needles. There are 4 of them. They're color coded. The shank of the needle looks just like a regular needle, and this is really hard to see. I'm sorry. Come on, there we go. Okay, this happens to be the yellow one, and they are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, yellow, red, green, and blue. The difference of the 4 needles is that the needle is sharpened like a chisel, and when it's in the machine, the direction that sharp edge points is a different angle. Say this one is 90 degree or 180 degrees because it's flat across. Maybe the next one is angled at 45 degrees, and the next one is angled at 90 degrees, and they're made different angles, so when you have a curved line to cut, that the angle of the cutwork needle you're using closely matches that angle, because this is a fixed angle, and if you were cutting something that was really tightly curved, it could be kind of stair-steppy instead of being fairly smooth. So depends on the design, how many of the cutwork needles will be called for. Let's look at some of the designs that we have, and again we can go to Cutwork Embroidery in our knowledge center here, or our advisory, and we can pick cutwork with scissors or cutwork needles. So let's use cutwork needles. These are some of the designs that are built into the machine for using the cutwork needles. So if I pick, say, this design, and I look at my colors in my thread color edit, it shows me that I have two colors of thread, and then I have 4 cutwork needles, and this is how they're going to appear in your color sequence when you're embroidering. So with the cutwork needles, you are going to do it you're going to use your thread, and let me move that over. So that's the first thread color, that's the second thread color. The first, oops, let's move in here. The first cutwork needle is only going to do a little bit, okay? The second cutwork needle is going to do another portion of that. You see that the darker lines show you where it's going to cut. The third one, and the fourth one. So once you've gone through all 4 of your needles, it will have cut the complete shape. Now, when it cuts it out, in order to keep that piece of fabric from falling, there are going to be little tiny places that still anchor that piece in the center that you will need to snip with a pair of scissors so that you have an actual hole in your fabric. Does that make sense? If you've not done cut work before. And then because it's cutting down through the fabric as well as the stabilizer, you're going to need to put an additional piece of stabilizer on the back of your embroidery to cover the holes, so that when it stitches the does the stitching to cover up the raw edge and maybe put some extra little stitching in between, it has cut that whole thing out completely. So you have to put in extra stabilizer so it has something to stitch on. And that usually is wash away stabilizer. All right. In the handout, it has some very good directions and shows you the symbols that you will see in your sampler book for the Cutwork designs. The first one shows that it will stitch a straight stitch around, like you see on the screen here. It stitches a straight stitch around where it is going to cut the holes. And then the Cutwork needles come in and actually cut out the fabric. So the design has stabilized the edges of those where it's going to cut the holes. And that's what these symbols are telling you, that it's going to do a stabilizing stitch. You're going to cut it. Once it's cut, and it's very hard to see on this diagram, there are little tiny places where it's still attached, and this is the symbol that shows you that you need to go in and clip those so that you can take the piece out of the hole, and then you need to add extra stabilizer underneath it to finish your design. On the one that I brought up on the screen, there is no stitching. It's the one that's in your handout. There is no stitching around that raw edge. It's just left raw, and that was a design that we used when the Epics first came out. One of the built-in sewing projects is a tote bag, which is done on leather or vinyl, and because it's done on that kind of a surface, it's not going to ravel, so you don't really need the stitching around it. If you could do this on regular fabric too, but you would eventually end up with little fuzzies on the inside of those spaces. Are there any, I know that it would be helpful to have a demonstration of these, but in the subsequent months, we are going to visit each one of these techniques in depth. So it's not just, here it is, good luck. We're not going to just leave you in the lurch here. We're going to do some in more comprehensive dealing with these different techniques in the future. All right.
That's great because I thought this was a lot for one day.
It is a lot for one day, Elizabeth. It is. So this is just to whet your appetite. All right. So to speak. All right. Our next subject on page 5 is yarn couching. And you can do yarn couching in 3 different ways. You can, let's see, again, it's in, no, you need specific designs for yarn couching. And under yarn embellished embroidery, you will find freestanding yarn couching, and you will find yarn couching on fabric, and also the specialty bobbin case. So what we're talking about right now is yarn couching on fabric. So these are some of the designs that are built into the machine. The one they show in the handout is up here at the top. Excuse me. And as you look at the screen, you can see that unlike the ribbon embroidery, it's not just a straight stitch. It's kind of a zigzag stitch, but almost, it makes a little extra stitch as it zigs and zags. And that's because it's not really stitching into the yarn, although it does at times. It's more stitching over the yarn. Okay, so like this is a sample of yarn couching. All right, and here's a few more. And these are stitches. You have yarn couching stitches designs in embroidery, and you have yarn couching stitches in sewing. You can also do yarn couching in as free motion. If you look at this, you can see that this was done with free motion, and this also could be done with free motion where you just did it in straight lines. In order to do the yarn couching in your handout, it shows you quite a collection of equipment here for the yarn couching. First, there are different feet for yarn couching in embroidery and in sewing. The ones for embroidery come in a set of 2, and they have a number, whoops. They have a number on them over here in the little corner, which I don't think you can even read with the camera. There's a 1 and a 2. The difference in them is that the size of the hole is different. You want that yarn to stay right lined up with your needle as you're stitching. So if you're using a small yarn, you want to use number 1. If you're using a bigger yarn, you want to use number 2. That's the reason for the difference of the feet. And they clip onto the ankle on your machine, your regular white ankle. They're going to clip onto it just like that. Also, as part of the yarn couching set, when you buy it, you're going to get some brackets that look like this. They're made to hook into the back of the machine. If you lift up the handle, there's a couple little slots back there that these this part of the guide will hook into. And personally, pardon me, I just threw everything on the floor. I have not had a lot of luck with putting the yarn in the back of the machine. What works better for me is to use this piece of guide here, and it fits into this little black hole in the back of your ankle with the screw. And I like to keep the yarn in front of me. Usually it's in my lap to make sure that it's feeding freely, and then to put this on there so that it the yarn it keeps the yarn centered going into the foot.
Is that one of the guides that comes with the 2 feet?
It comes with, used to be, we could get them separate, but I think right now you have to buy it with a, like a gimping foot or something like that. Okay, so I put the yarn in it here and then thread it into the foot. The threader that comes with the couching feet looks like this. It's got a very stiff handle on it, so if you're going to use a nylon loop that you can, thread your yarn with, but you can't do that when the foot is on the machine. You have to do it with the foot off of the machine. I use the famous threaders that you get from your dentist, which are flexible, so you can thread the yarn in while your foot is actually on the machine. So let's see, where'd you go? Down in the machine. That's not good. Okay. Okay. So this yarn is pretty good size, and it's appropriate to use the number 2 foot. What you don't want to use is yarns that have an uneven size. You'll have a big lump and then a skinny place and a big lump and a skinny place. It has to be able to move through the foot freely in order to work. Okay, so you can test it out and see if it's gonna move free, because what happens is as it's stitched down and your fabric moves, then it's gonna pull the yarn with it. So it's up to you if you want to do some yarn couching. You can try feeding it from the back as they show you, but most everybody I know will feed it from the front. And like right now I have this box on my lap, and my yarn is in there, and then I can watch it and I can make sure that I have enough slack as it is embroidering so it doesn't miss the yarn, or the yarn doesn't mess up. Okay, let's see. And that's, are there any questions about that as far as the yarn couching?
How do you get that arm again?
It's available with some feet. and I believe they're like gimping, called gimping feet. And it may have two pigtails instead of just one, but that would work just as well.
Is gimping Gimping?
Yes.
I think I got mine with the braiding foot.
It did, okay, it could be a braiding foot too. Thank you, Mary. I just know that we used to be able to buy them separately. And one thing you probably would be disappointed if you tried to use some yarn like this. What's going to happen is it's cute with the little furries and so forth, but the couching stitches are going to nail that down, and you'd end up trying to pick it all out so it still looked furry. So keep in mind how the yarn is going to be stitched down, and the size of the yarn, and the fact that your yarn should be fairly evenly sized. I mean, you could use, this is a fairly flat yarn here, and that would work, should work fine. As long as it'll, glide through the hole that's in the foot. Okay. Questions? Comments? All right. Now we are on page 6. And on the top of page 6 is a picture of how those brackets would fit on the back of your machine for the yarn couching. What is being on? Okay, thread velvet. We have done some thread velvet projects in some of our classes. What thread velvet looks like is, and that one may not show up real well. Let's see. Here's the one that shows up pretty well. That one doesn't because it's dark, but it's many layers of thread. And when you stitch it out, it looks like any other stitching, but you have stitched several layers of thread, maybe 3 or 4, and sometimes even different colors, like this little blue flower here. When you look at it, it just looks like a fairly thick raised embroidery, but then you take a knife or a seam ripper and you cut right down through the middle of these layers of thread, and they call it blooming. It blooms and looks like velvet. And so all of these flowers here have been cut, and you can see that there are different colors of thread, with the darker thread in the center and the lighter thread on top. But when they're cut, then the lighter thread becomes like an outline for the darker threads. And there are designs built into the machine for that. Under surfaced embroidery, there's thread velvet, and it brings up the designs that are built into the machine that are actually thread velvet. And in your sampler book, when you find those designs, they are going to say, if I knew where they were, they're actually going to say thread velvet in the book, so that you know for sure. Like this one right here, B086, it says thread velvet. So in looking at your book, you can see that this version of the design down here is just regular embroidery, but this one up here is thread velvet. Okay. And let's see. There is no, okay, in the front of the book, there is a little explanation of designs with the thread velvet technique. It explains that to create the thread velvet effect, cut the satin stitch down the middle from the right side. Avoid cutting the very last underlay of stitches for best results. To secure the thread for laundering, add textile glue to the wrong side of the embroidery to secure the threads. Because once you've cut them, then they're vulnerable to being pulled out. So it's a good idea then to go on the back side of your embroidery and put some glue on it. And I've done that on here, but you can't I can feel it, but you can't really see it. But you don't want, especially if you're going that what you have embroidered is going to be worn and washed or handled a lot. You don't want those stitches to start pulling out. Any questions on that? This is another design that's in the machine that's is thread velvet. So some of the wider places you're able to cut, but there are parts that aren't cut also.
Judy, we should do that caterpillar again. That was so cute.
The what again, Lee?
Caterpillar that you did. Did you have it? Anyway, that was so cute. I gave mine away. So I wouldn't mind doing that again.
Well, we will have a section on thread velvet.
Yeah, that was really fun.
So do you have any tricks on trying to, like with especially the rose design, trying to identify the areas you're supposed to cut?
Let's see. That would be maybe this design here. Come on. Let's see our colors here. Let's see that one. So that's just straight embroidery. Let's see, looking at there we go. Well, I'm trying to be able to see this with the same time I'm looking at the screen. When you stitch them out, they're going to be, you can watch it as it stitches out to see where it puts the extra layers. And then when you, like this part definitely is a fill stitch because of the texture of it. And these little skinny ones here are just one layer of satin stitch. So if you pay attention to it as it stitches out, like this one has some skinny stuff here, and then it put more layers on the wider part. It's just, you have to kind of pay attention. This one is pretty skinny for thread velvet, but it did do layers of thread. So if you watch it and see where the layers of thread are as you're stitching, that will be a big indicator as to where you should cut.
Okay, and because even though the design looked like it was all red where you've got just open fabric there, it didn't stitch that way.
What again, Mary?
If you looked at the picture,
Oh yeah.
It looked like that was all solidly stitched with red.
Yeah,
So, okay,
yeah.
thanks. That
The
helps.
picture isn't necessarily going to show it,
Right.
especially on the screen. I wonder if I could find that in the book here. Or did she say L11? Okay, so I'm in there, JKL. I love these books that are in order again. Yeah, even on the picture in the book, which is not coming through very well on the camera, it's difficult to tell. The only way to really do it is to see that as it stitches out.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Any other questions on our thread velvet? This doesn't show up real well as thread velvet, but all of these little flowers and then this swoop part in here are thread velvet, and the rest of it is just some satin stitching. All right, let's see. Page, where are we? Let's see, we did thread velvet, yarn couching, thread velvet, and then our last topic on page 7, well, not our last topic. Our next topic on page 7 is fringe or chenille. And we've done some projects with fringe or chenille, and this is a sample of a fringe or chenille flower. And there are, again, special designs. In surfaced embroidery, it says fringe embroidery. So there's just about 6 designs built into the machine that have a fringe on them. This one was part of, I don't remember. I'm sorry, but I think it might have been part of this design here. And you can, come on. You can see that the flowers themselves look like fringe on the picture. When it stitches out, these are going to stitch as satin stitches. And once they have been stitched, then you're going to turn, and your embroidery is finished, you're going to turn your embroidery to the back side. And this is the flower, and the back side here, you can tell that the bobbin thread has gone away or been cut away underneath these stitches on the outside. Now, I like to put some fabric glue on the inside edge of my bobbin thread here before I cut it, and then cut it either with some small scissors or your seam ripper. Then you're going to flip it to the right side, and you're going to lift those satin stitches up from being pulled to the back side to create your fringe. Did that make sense? Okay, Elizabeth, you making sense with this?
Yeah, it looks very cool.
Okay, so that's a technique that has been with us in these embroidery machines forever, I think, hasn't it, Mary?
In a long time, yeah.
Yeah, that's something that's been included, and it's it's very effective, but you really do want to put some glue on the back side to anchor those stitches. There will always be some kind of a stitch to anchor one end of the fringe stitches, but I feel safer again if I've put some glue on the back of it.
Another helpful hint I would recommend is make sure you're not using the same color in your bobbin as you did in your flower.
A good suggestion, Mary, because then it's when you stitch something with satin stitches, sometimes you will the back side, you will see a lot of the front or the needle thread showing sometimes in the bobbin thread, and if it's not a different color, you might be trimming off some of your fringe stitches, which you don't want to. And when you pull them up, they're all going to be little loops, and if you really wanted to, you could go in and you could cut those loops, but normally I'm fine with just leaving the loops and not trying to cut them. Here's excuse me, here's a couple more fringe flowers that were done in exactly the same way, with the back of it, the bobbin thread all cut off. Okay. Let's see real quick. Oh, you can't see them because this is what Mary was talking about. If you had, can you see that the difference? Maybe the blue one. See the on a satin stitch, your needle thread is going to get pulled to the back. And if your bobbin thread, which is the cream colored thread here, if that were the blue also, and as you were trimming your bobbin threads, you couldn't tell the difference if this was blue and this was blue. So to have your bobbin thread a different color gives you a better idea of where you should be cutting your bobbin threads to make your fringe.
So where are you gluing?
I'm gluing on these round flowers, okay? On the round ones, I glued right where I could see the difference in the color of the needle thread and the bobbin thread. So this is all glued together, as you can see here. It's
How about on that other one?
On the other one, if I were going to glue, I would, well, because this is not made for fringe. This is the thread velvet
Okay.
one.
Yep.
Normally your fringe one is going to have something, it would maybe have a line of stitching like right at the edge, or you know,
Okay.
it's not going to be a satin stitch like this is not made for fringing.
Okay.
Okay. It has to have something to anchor it.
And so you're just putting glue on that anchor line.
Right. Exactly. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Any other questions about the fringe? Okay, then now our last topic on the lesson part of this is for felting. And felting requires some special equipment, if you will. There is this little plastic piece here, and that gets put onto your Let me move this over so we can see. Okay, you're going to take your ankle off, and there's a little bracket, if you will, on this little cup. And the purpose of this thing is to keep your finger out of the way of the felting needle. The felting needle is a specialty needle, and it looks different. Let's see. Okay, come on. All right, that's the regular needle. All right, right there. A felting needle is much shorter, and it's also very skinny. It has no eye in it because, and this is going to be really hard to see on the camera because I don't think it'll focus that close. If you run your fingers up and down lightly on a felting needle, you're going to feel that it's rough, and there are little barbs, little pieces that stick out along the shaft of the needle here, and those will catch fibers and felt them or push them down into whatever you are using as your base on your felting. Now, if that doesn't make sense, let me show you what felting looks like. All right. This is, and let me not lose my needle. This is a design that has been felted. And again, let's see. Fringe embroidery. No, not specialty. Felting. Felting is a separate topic on our machines, and there are different kinds of felting. Felting freestanding, which means that you would end up with, excuse me, something that looks like this pumpkin. This is felted and then cut out. All right. Or you could have felting embroidery, multiple layers, or felted embroidery single layer. Well, this is a single layer felting, and felting is done from the back side, if you will. Whatever is the front side of your object you're embroidering, you're going to turn it upside down and put your felting material on the wrong side. Then those little barbed needles are going to take fibers from this, like this pink here, and shove them through the main piece or the fabric or whatever you're felting into. Now you notice that the color of the pink here, and it's actually pink, not red. The camera is just turning it red. That this is much brighter than the felted design on the front of the fabric. That's because as the barbs on those needles are pushing the fibers from this colored fabric through this gray fabric, it's also pushing some of the gray fibers with it. So it's not going to be the same pure color as your felting material. It's going to combine the two of them and give you a much softer look because of the gray on this particular one. Does that make sense? So you might want to take that into consideration as when you're ready to felt and you did something like this and you said, oh, well, I really wanted it to look really nice and bright like this. It's not going to, because it's going to combine the two colors. Okay. All right. And you can use all sorts of different fibers for felting. You can use, this one was a piece of actual felt like you would buy the felt squares at a hobby store or at a fabric store. That was felt. You can use strips of wool fabric. The freestanding pumpkin was made using what is called roving, which is this kind of, looks like wool that's been dyed, and that's that was how the freestanding one was made, by using wash away mesh as a stabilizer and then laying a wad of this on top of that and then putting more mesh stabilizer on top and stitching through that. And excuse me, it's what it's doing that instance, it's mashing the barbs of the needles are mashing the fibers together. And if, like on this pumpkin, there's a little place that's a little thin, I can see that, maybe not on the, and if I had noticed that before I took it out of the hoop and cut it out, I could have just gone back and put more roving on top of that and restitched that to make it thicker. So once you've stitched out your say a freestanding design, there are some of those built into the machine. Okay, are the ones that are the single layer ones. Again, there are some of those built into the machine. When I was playing with felting, someone had some strips of wool that they had bought, and I wanted to use those as felting. So for a felting fabric, so I zigzagged them together, and then I felted them into some denim. And you can see that, you know, it's not near as bright as what I had originally, but it's still fun. One thing you need to know about, because felting is done upside down, you'll want to mirror your pattern before you felt, or your design before you felt it, because this is what happens if you don't. So another fun thing about using the felting designs and denim is that this is only denim. There's no felting fabric or medium on the back, because denim is made up of different colors of fibers. It's the dark colors and the light colors. When you stitch a felting design on it, it's pushing the light colors through to the front. So you can felt denim just by itself and make a kind of a cool design rather than using, something on the back to get your design.
Judy, does that hold up well to washings, or do you want to put back, some glue on the back side just to?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Isn't that a cool thing?
Yes.
All right. One thing I did not mention in when we were talking about cut work was that it makes a mess in your machine because it's actually cutting the fibers or the threads as it's creating the design. So it's going to put a whole lot of mess down in your bobbin area. Well, one thing that comes with the felting set is this little cup. The felting is also going to make a mess in your machine. And you will take, because felting uses no thread at all, you're going to take the thread out of the top, you're going to take the bobbin out, and you're going to replace it with this little cup, which somewhat, it doesn't really collect a lot of the stuff because, the needle is back behind it here. But the thing that it does is to, if you will, fool the machine into thinking that it has a bobbin in there. All right. So that's useful when you're using the cutwork needles as well as when you're using the felting needles to make your machine think that there's a bobbin in there with thread on it. Because the detector for the bobbin thread is a little light that shines. And when it gets a reflection off of the shiny bobbin, then it says, whoa, I'm out of thread. But this one is not shiny at all. And so the machine will just be as happy as it can be thinking it has a bobbin in there. All right.
How often do you have to replace those cut needles?
The cutwork needles?
Yeah.
I've never replaced them, and I haven't done a lot with them, but you can buy just a package of cutwork needles separately.
Okay.
And unless you do, a lot, or you're doing something that's fairly abrasive, like, or thick, like, you did a lot of vinyl cut work or something like that, then you'd have to replace them more often.
I guess you'd notice it, right?
I'm sorry?
I guess you would notice when you need to.
Yeah, because they're not going to work they're not going to give you a very clean cut.
Okay.
Okay, there's one more thing for the felting needles, because even if you're using the single hole throat plate for it, that hole is still pretty good size. So there's a plastic plate that fits over the feed dogs also and clips into place for your felting needles. Okay. And if you had a set of felting needles for your non-Epic previous machines, you need to get a new one because it's different than the older one. The needles, the little cup, and the finger protector, and the little bobbin thing are the same, but the little plastic plate is different, and it's only sold as a set. Any questions, comments about that? Felting is a fun thing. Well, it's all fun, but felting is just a little different. At one time, I think some machine manufacturers sold machines that were just specifically for felting.
Yeah, I know Baby Lock did. I don't know about others. Judy, on the page 9, up by at the very beginning by the green picture,
On where?
page 9 of felting.
Okay.
And you know, it shows the needles, and it has 1 and 2, and besides 1, it said use only on multi-layer. What are they talking about?
Okay, here on our screen where we had the tutorials, and it said felting multi-layers. There's some designs where, that was not smart. Hit the wrong button. The designs for multi-layers, let's look at the one they have. All right, well, that shows up real well. Okay, let me do something here so we can see this. Okay, my first layer is going to do a certain part of the design. And the second, if you're using 2 different colors of whatever you're putting behind or on top of your material to push through as a felt, like, okay, on this one, it's got different colors, but I used a multicolored piece. They're talking about where you do, say, an outline in one color, and then you would come in and fill in the inside part with a different color of felting.
I'm still not understanding. Are they saying you're gonna, I mean, you don't have to change your needle.
No, you don't. But that's it.
Oh, they're just saying that you're gonna see where it stops and still has a second felting needle, but you just put the different material on it. Is that what they're trying to tell you?
Yes, that's what they're trying to tell you.
Okay, all right, I get it. I just
Okay.
couldn't understand what they were trying to say.
Well, sometimes it's hard to put into words, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there only one felting needle?
There is only one felting needle. When you buy, and again, you can buy the needles separately like you can the Cutwork needles, but you get a package of 5 of them with the kit.
But they're all the same.
They're all exactly the same. They're not like the Cutwork needles that are unique to them. And then when you open the package, it's going to look like you don't have anything in there because they're short.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of neat that the package is made such that you just open one little section at a time. So, you know, you can not spill all of them at once. You can only spill one at a time. Okay. So any questions on any of that we've been through? Okay. Well, there's a project associated with this, and the project itself has a lot of different techniques in it. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to kind of glance at it, but it's a table topper that has all sorts of, it has just plain embroidery, it has some fringe embroidery, it has some thread velvet, and it has some freestanding yarn couching, and then it has some appliques also. But the thing that excited me most about the project was how they hemmed the fabric for the table topper. Oopsie, there's a needle there. They used a method which is called hem stitching, and to me, hem stitching is a very unique technique. If you, let me get my samples here. Okay. This is what, if you buy something that is made commercially with hem stitching, this is what it looks like. Okay, it's a very distinct row of holes, if you will, in the fabric. And it's very, again, it's kind of an heirloom technique, heirloom sewing technique. It's kind of fun in that you can thread ribbon or cording or threads through it to enhance your project. You can even use it to hold two pieces of hem stitch fabric. You can hold them together by threading ribbon through the hem stitching to hold it. And to create those stitches in the fabric, commercially, there are machines that do that. On a home machine, it's not something that you can easily do. But in this project, they have come up with a method that this is, I used, let's see if I bring it over here, if you can see it better. This is how the project tells you to hem the fabric for your table topper. And it works really well, and I think it looks great. So if you will bear with me, I will quickly go through doing what they have done here to create the hem in that on that fabric for the table topper. What you need is some fabric that's fairly loosely woven and fairly even, and they suggest that you use linen, a heavyweight linen. And the first thing you need to do is to pull out some threads that you're going to use as guidelines, and also those threads are going to be important to create the holes in your fabric when you do your hem. So they tell you to, and this is by no means as big as the table topper, to take a ruler and measure 1 5/8 inches from the edge and pull a thread, which I have done. You have to sometimes, the fabric that I used is called Osnaburg, and sometimes it takes a little bit of work because sometimes these the threads that you're pulling are really not very sturdy. So when you pick a thread to pull, pick something that is not really heavy or really light, kind of a medium weight, because the threads in these kind of fabrics are not all exactly the same size. So I pulled the threads on all 4 sides of this piece of fabric. Then their instructions tell you to make a double fold for the hem. All right, and you're going to fold it such that your folded edge here comes right up to where you have pulled the thread. And you're going to do that on all 4 sides. You're going to double fold the hem, and then you're going to press it, and you end up with a pretty good sized lump right here in the corner because you've got all those layers of fabric in there, but that's okay. We'll take care of that later. So you're going to fold all 4 sides in and press it really, really well. Then you are going to, okay, this one is folded and pressed. Then you're going to open this out so that you only have the first 2 folds folded and your drawn thread lines are in here. Once you've done that, you're going to fold this so that the edges are even, the folded edges are even here, and your drawn thread lines, you want to match those up. Okay, we're getting ready to make the miter. The corner is mitered to make your hem. So we're getting ready to sew that miter. So you're going to fold that out, and then with it folded out, you're going to sew from your drawn thread lines here at an angle to where your second fold was. And I've marked that with a red pen here and stitched on an angle to make my miter. So when I turn it to the wrong side, then my hem is mitered. All right, and then I'm going to trim the excess fabric here. Now I can trim it along, you know, like an 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching line, or I could trim it square. If I trim it square and then open it out, it's going to completely fill up the underneath of this corner. I have chosen to trim mine, let me find the right corner. I trimmed mine close to the stitching. All right, so when I turn it to the inside, then I just have more bulk right along the seam. It's your choice, you know, how you want to do it. Then once you have done your miter corner and you've turned it so that your hem again is folded right up next to your drawn stitch line, you're going from the wrong side, you're going to just straight stitch right as close to the edge of that fold as you can, but you want to be sure that when you're doing that, that you still can see that drawn thread line. And so that's just a straight stitch, and you want this, I used a contrast thread here, but you want to use thread that exactly matches your fabric as close as you can. Once you have done that, then you're going to change the needle in your machine to a wing needle. And when you got your package of needles with your machine, the one in the middle is a wing needle that you want to use. And do not use the needle threader when you have a wing needle in. You have to thread it manually because it's fatter than a regular needle, and the needle threader is not set for fat needles. So you have to thread it manually, which is not a real big deal. You're going to be in sewing, not embroidery. And you are going to go to section C, and you're going to select stitch number 6. Okay, now I have the straight stitch plate on, so it's not happy about that. Oh. Because this is a stitch that looks like a blanket stitch, so it's going to stitch to the sides as well as forward. So there. All right. So I picked stitch number 6, and there you can see it on the screen, and it says this is made for a wing needle. And I don't have the wing needle in, but if I touch my needle threader at this point, I get a pop-up telling me, don't use the needle threader with a wing needle. So I like that a whole lot because it reminds me not to get in a hurry and try to use my needle threader with my wing needle in the machine. But once you have the wing needle in the machine and have threaded it manually, and you are going to work from the right side of the fabric, and you are going to make sure that the left swing of the needle goes into that drawn thread line of holes, and that the right swing of the needle goes into the hem. So I found that on the screen it calls for the B foot, but I found that using the A foot, I could use these little, if you will, prongs to go right along the drawn needle edge, and it was perfect. It just stitched it exactly where I wanted it, even though it called for the B foot. The A foot was constructed such that I could use this piece right here as a guide to get my stitching exactly where I wanted it. And once that's done, then you have your, what I call faux hem stitched hem in your fabric, and it's cool. I mean, you could use that on a lot of things. You just have to be able to pull a thread to make sure that you have the wing needle can make a decent size hole. The wing needle itself would make a hole, and the thread tension would help enlarge that hole, but having drawn a thread makes the holes more prominent.
If you pulled a couple threads in that spot, would that help make the holes bigger? That you could actually put it
It's
into it?
possible. I thought about that when I was doing this last night, but I didn't do it. So I'll let you try that, Elizabeth, and you can report back to us.
All right.
Does your
Challenge
stitch
on.
length or your stitch size, does it hit every hole or?
Well, no, it's not, because
Okay.
it's even on, like a commercially created hem stitch, there are several threads in between each hole. It's not just one thread.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that was, to me, that was the most exciting part about the project in this lesson.
I think it's beautiful. I love that.
I mean, you could just for practice, you could make a whole bunch of, I started on I started with a 6-inch piece of fabric, and those would make cute little coasters. So let's see, I don't think I made, I can't find my paper. There they are. Oh, the the project is using a lot of different techniques and different stabilizers and so forth. I thought it was, they used the same Fringe Flower, and they have some good pictures of cutting the bobbin thread and pulling it, the needle threads up. They give you the stitch numbers for the design, or design numbers that they've used on the freestanding yarn couching. They tell you that you're going to use water soluble stabilizer and make several of them, and they end up being the where's the picture? Those freestanding yarn couched pieces end up being the petals of this flower on this table topper. And then they've stitched out another freestanding embroidery design and stitched it on top of those to cover up the center. So they've used things in a little bit different ways than what we're normally thinking of them. Any questions, comments, anything else?
Judy, what kind of fabric is that you have on there?
What kind of fabric have I on here? Yeah. This is called Osnaburg.
Osnaburg, I've heard of that.
And sometimes it's a little difficult to find. It's not something that Sew-ciety carries. I'm thinking that you could use, because it is so even, the threads and so forth are so even in it. If you used a very small, I'm gonna call it gauge, cross stitch fabric, that would work. Like a 28 or 32 or whatever, cross stitch fabric, that would be a good one, because the threads that it's composed of are fairly even, and it should be easy to pull threads in. And you probably would get a bigger open space by pulling a thread in something like that than with this or linen.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. When I first saw the project, I thought, oh, well, that's pretty cool, and I have to try it. But then when I actually did it, I got kind of excited about it because it looks good.
Yeah, that.
And it's a way to dress up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The caveat is that you have to be, on a straight of grain and to pull the threads to get it to look right.
That is pretty.
So,
Yeah, I'll have to try that. I like the idea of their freestanding yarn flower too. That's kind of clever.
yeah, remember the Afghan that Karen Charles made
Uh-huh,
out of yarn
right.
that she had done the same way, a freestanding yarn couching design. And let's see if we
I
go to
know, but
embroidery.
I thought of putting it together as a flower, you know? That's
Yeah,
what I thought was clever.
yeah, and that's one of them that's going to come up when you do your select in your main screen. If you select the embroidery yarn couching freestanding, the leaf is there.
Yeah,
And the designs that Karen used were from I'm sure they're on the library now, a square one. So we
yeah,
don't have a square one built in,
right.
but
Oh, I've got lots of things to play with, huh?
yeah, and we will be playing with them more in depth, although we won't be doing hem stitching, but we will be using the various techniques that we have just kind of sped through today to give you an idea of what the machine can do and not just plain embroidery.
Mhm.
Oh, all right.
All right. So I'm glad you made it, Mary. Is Jerry okay?
Yeah, he's all right. We had a lot of disagreements between doctors today, but we've got him back home in shot, so hopefully it'll work. We'll see.
All right. Well, I hope it does too.
All right, nice seeing everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you so
Yeah.
much, everyone, for being here. And
Thank you.
I'll see you next
Judy,
month. Yes?
I have a question about the software classes. Have you gone through digitizing as part of that yet?
We touch on digitizing in a lot of them. It's not, compartmentalized as to this is digitizing, this is, there will be a main topic
Uh-huh.
for each class, or if it's a project in the class, it may use several different features of the software, and it may include digitizing. So it's not an isolated subject.
Okay.
I think there might be something if you go out to my SewNet to the Knowledge Center and look at the Vantage, I think they call it Vantage Newsletter. I believe they have a video out there and they do a digitizing exercise. Don't hold me to it, but I think they do.
All right. Well, thank you, Mary. I'll look at that.
Thank you, Mary.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Miss Maggie, for being here.
Yeah. Yeah. See you later.
All right, take care, all
Bye.
of you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Judy.
Judy.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Judy. That was a great class. Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you, Miss Carol.